We're calling this one social media as a two-way street. It's a one-on-one. And what we really want to talk about is how social media can be used not only to communicate with citizens, but to measure sentiment and learn about the current demeanor in communities. And I think, as the mayor said previously, that's going to be really important to head things off at the pass in a time when emotions are ruling us versus our reason. And of course, as Benjamin Franklin said, when the emotions rule, they never rule wisely. But that's the kind of time we're in. So we've got someone who's the CIO of an award-winning city and a big thinker on the subject to take us through what has been relatively successful where he is, probably one of the more successful models in the world. So in addition to his work with city manager Dana McDaniel to build one of the world's most successful and followed intelligent communities, Doug McCollough has established himself as an advocate for diversity in technology as well. With over 2 decades in tech and leadership roles in state, government, smart cities, nonprofits, Doug is now branching out and also serves as the CEO of Coding Bootcamp Color Coded Labs. He's a new kind of Renaissance man, in my view. He's got deep knowledge of smart mobility, broadband expansion, blockchain and government, all the tech stuff. But he also fundamentally understands that at the heart of the intelligent community is a soul. There is something here that, as he likes to say, makes us better versions of ourselves. And that's really where I think we want to go. He's passionate about extending the opportunities of the tech industry to the pool of undertapped talent sitting out there around the world waiting to help us become better versions of ourselves. So I want to welcome him here today. Doug, welcome.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you for your kind words and description. And it's always wonderful to be with you.
Well, we appreciate you always making the time. I don't know how much of that last session you heard, but the mayors were communicating about how they were communicating during the pandemic, because most of them are walking through a pathless land. But the role of social media and the role it's playing in intelligent communities is something that Dublin has been, working on for a long time. As usual, you guys were ahead of the curve. Can you give us a little bit of a snapshot as to how the city of Dublin uses social media or how it has evolved?
Absolutely. And I did catch a bit of the last session, and I will amplify that in a time of COVID or any crisis, communication becomes not a nice to have, not even a critical thing. It becomes everything. People panic. So being able to communicate with your citizens and with the public is so critical a thing. And we can use technology to make that a lot easier and more effective. The city of Dublin for a while now has been using a technology called Zen City, Z-E-N City. This is not a commercial for that, but just an acknowledgement that having a tool to work with social media can be pretty critical. The other really big deal here is just having a communications function in your city, in your community. And the city had that pretty good, did traditional press and traditional press releases and communicating with the public pretty good. But at some point, we recognized, as I think all of you have, that social media isn't something that you can choose to use or choose to pay attention to or any of that. It is critical. It is happening. It is here. We don't get to decide that social media is something that we don't like and we don't want our people communicating that way, so we're just going to ignore it. That just simply isn't going to work. And so we found ourselves in a situation in which communication is happening in our neighborhoods with groups that may have formed in an ad hoc way that we don't control. We don't have the opportunity to drive them or anything like that. And we recognized that we needed to jump in with both feet on social media. We started out just really monitoring it and understanding it. And then you move into kind of a rumor control situation, and then maybe move into a more sophisticated strategy-based appreciation of what's happening here with social media. What does it have to do with communities and cities and government and those kinds of things? And that is where I think we have been for the last few years, developing all of that further.
Yeah, and what have been the results of the biggest challenge that you had? I mean, the Mayor Eisenberger in particular was talking about making sure that authorities were the people that people were directed to, especially during the time of a major public health crisis. Um, do you find that that was the biggest challenge, that people were just, putting bad information out there to each other, or was it something else?
Well, I would say that that is true, but I would take it one step further, that it's often hard for us to go back several months and remember the tone that was taking place at a particular time. And I would remind us all to remember that there was a deep distrust of even the authorities. We're at a time now where the term fake news is commonplace, but I remember when it was new, and information from authorities could be dismissed by calling it fake news. And so a real crisis happened. We still have had, and I think we still do have, a lot of trust in local government. But during
Yeah,
the pandemic, we had a moment in which the local government was going to depend on more federal, more national government resources, such as the Center for Disease Control. And so simply relying on what we might trust as say, hey, this is, we need to drive everybody to this information. I think we have found that you've got to do a couple of steps better than that. People want to know, what do you, City of Dublin, think? What are we going to do about masks? What's going to happen to our 4th of July parade? What is going on with our schools? I don't necessarily trust the federal government. I don't trust the Center for Disease Control. I don't trust anybody really. And so that is a new thing that you really have to establish new kinds of trust and credibility, or build upon trust and credibility that maybe you have had, and reference the authorities and those kinds of things. But figure out, is that working? Because it might not be working, and you can't just keep on pointing to the county health department or the state and
yeah,
assume that everyone's going to be okay with that.
right. Is it proper, Doug, to do something that governments have been trying to do since the time of the Assyrians in biblical times, which is to shape perceptions? Is it impossible today to do that, or is it more important today to be able to do
You know,
that? And again, using social media within that context.
I don't think that it is impossible, and it is appropriate. However, I tend to think in terms of being very careful with that power, because we do have the power to do it, and we have trust because we haven't abused our power. Um, and I wrote down 4 things that we as a local government really should be thinking about when we're talking about social media and kind of shaping the narrative. One of them is monitor. You've got to monitor what's going on, how people feel. The second one is, as we develop our messaging, test those messages before blasting them out completely to the public. And you can do that through social media. The third thing is to calibrate your messaging so that you're really getting it right. And the fourth thing is to drive. And that's the question that I think you're asking now. Why wait for the distrust or the rumors or the panic? Let's drive the narrative, get ahead of things, and just sort of be in control of at least the information flow. Now, that being said, you don't want to block. You certainly want to be hearing what your citizens and residents are saying. So there's a fine line there. But I definitely do think that if you get ahead of things and you know what's coming, like, for example, there's a new announcement about a mask mandate coming, or that vaccinations are going to be something we really want to push the public to do. Let's get ahead of those things, drive the conversation in a way that we can influence. I will say that, rather than control. And I do think that it can be done and it should be done.
Just 2 questions. First, how do you test? If other communities here are tuned in, how would you test those messages on a social media platform or on Zen City?
Yeah. So we actually, if you're ready to monitor and you are measuring sentiment, then you can throw it like a weather balloon up, a small message to see how people might react. The city is considering thus and so. We would Love your
Mm.
comments and opinions on this. Or, look out later for an announcement about the upcoming parade restrictions. Now, you haven't really given information, but often people will react negatively or will tell you, well, it better say this or it better say that. So to me, before making a very large announcement of something that you're committed to, these are the kinds of small messages you can put out. You also don't have to put everything out to Twitter or Facebook. Local social media networks such as Nextdoor are a good way to test the message out in a neighborhood of a city, not the entire
Mm.
city or the entire public. So we have found that by crafting a campaign before you just put information out and then measuring reactions to that campaign, you can then build a more comprehensive, committed campaign later.
Right, and that's a good strategy. Now here's a challenge, right? With the issues around policing, especially in the United States, the protests that we had, last summer in the wake of the George Floyd incident. What we're finding is that younger people are not necessarily tuning in to their city platforms. When you talk about trust, I mean, nobody's trusting anybody, and younger people are trusting themselves, or they're trusting various movements, whether it's BLM or something else. That's the next generation of leaderships. That's the next generation of people who are going to sit in your seat. How are you going to build trust there? How do you get them to pay attention to the elected authority?
Yeah, there is some acknowledgement here also of following the channel, the appropriate channel, and not you. You may not be that channel, and that's okay. And I think that's the scary thing that you were talking to
Right.
Robert about when the automobile came around. We are not in control. We are monitoring and we are influencing, but we don't necessarily want a government information channel being what society uses to make up its mind about things. And we should have independent conversations in our public, and we should be listening to them often. So, we talk about government leadership and political leadership. And, at some point, you kind of have to have people's leadership and community leadership. And we should be being driven by the will of the community if we understand it. And so sometimes our communication with another generation or another way of communicating is not one way. And the title of this talk is a two-way street. And I think that that is appropriate. And we need to start thinking about a time in which information is coming to us and we are running our government according to that, as opposed to we are running the government and we'll tell you what you need to know.
Right. To pick up on that, one of the things that's, I think, most admirable about Dublin, and we've had long conversations about this, and I've spoken with Dana and Dana McDaniel, the rest of the leadership team there, is that Dublin seems to understand almost implicitly that the role of government is not to rule, that the role of government is to enable the private sector to thrive, to enable the university sector to learn, to enable the citizen to live his and her life, in a prosperous community. Um, is that a careful distinction that a community has to make as it gets bigger and bigger and more influential? And if so, how do you distinguish between when you're enabling and when you're just pissing people off because you're telling them what to do?
It's a really good question. And I believe because we are growing, we continue to grow, not because we decided we want to grow, but people like what we're doing and they continue to come here and thrive. And so we are growing as a community. And I do believe that all communities, and this is a major point of the Intelligent Community Forum method and concept, need to understand their roots and their history and their heritage and honor that. And that is part of where Dublin is coming from, being more of a listening government than a telling government. And I do believe that that is deliberate. I visit other communities, and my message there would be, if you can build information infrastructure, just as you would build a road, just as you would build a park, then you can enable this kind of listening. And that is kind of where our social media is coming from. Social media exists without us, But if we can create the structure that enables us to hear what is already being said, then we're doing what city governments and localities do best, which is build and maintain infrastructure that enables other activity to happen, set the rules of how to use that infrastructure, like our roads or our parks, but then allow growth and creativity to occur. And that growth benefits you. Now, what this requires also is that you don't necessarily profit from everything that happens, and you've got to be able to ignore that. And I see a lot of cities so focused on raising revenue and those kinds of things that they don't allow just growth and happiness and pleasure and quality of life to flourish in a community as an end of itself.
That's a great answer. Just keeping your CIO hat on, let's talk about that building information infrastructure, because I think that it is going to be one of the preeminent issues of our time, how to put this infrastructure in place so that we can communicate with a new type of citizen, a new type of government requirement, and all the things that have been alluded to this morning. A lot of CIOs listen to you, especially the smaller cities. What's your counsel to them on how to think about social media as a two-way street, but even more broadly, how to think about a communications infrastructure from square one if they want to become intelligent communities?
Yeah, becoming intelligent, the interconnectivity between different entities that make up a community is the critical piece there. When it comes to how to think about, particularly for a CIO, anyone who wants to leverage technology to have an information infrastructure and those kinds of things, there's an analysis here. And part of it is we use social media because we didn't have the capacity to do what social media can do. Had we built it ourselves, we wouldn't be doing that, and they fulfill a something that's missing. There are other things that are missing today that we can build, and we should, or else an app maker somewhere is going to create it and deploy it, and we won't be able to go backwards with it. So one of those things I believe is identity, digital identity, and so we are exploring that in our community. We believe that a more instant ability to poll people is something that social media does not have right now. Certainly you can do an instant poll on social media, but there are so many limitations with social media right now. One of them is you don't really know you're talking to your citizens. You don't have the ability to say, this is someone who really hates what we're doing, but do they live here? Do their kids go to school here? Do they work here? What do we know? How can we use this information more effectively? And so those are pieces of functionality that we still have the ability to create. And I recommend that CIOs and technology professionals get creative about the connection points between the city and its citizens, and between citizens and each other, and citizens and businesses. These are the opportunities for us to get ahead of whatever's coming next.
And then, of course, along with all of that, there's the issues related to privacy. Now, mind you, we live in a time when people are willing to sacrifice all of their private information to have a good shopping experience at Bloomingdale's online. Mm-hmm. And yet they're going to complain to you about privacy. They don't want to send you the information that they got a vaccine or something, or have that on their record. There's a bit of a disconnect, I think, frankly, among people. But having said that, these are the citizens. These are the people who, for whom, they have the natural rights to choose their government and how they're governed and who enables them. We had that issue with Sidewalk Labs up in Toronto, where at the core of it, privacy was really at the core of the discussion about whether they wanted Google up there or not. And the issue just has continued to rage forward. How should we be thinking about privacy as, again, someone who sits in the CIO seat of a community that has pretty formidable tools to be invasive, but also, to not be?
Yeah. There's a lot of more work and conversation to be had here between people and their government. And I would say people in their social media tool of choice and people in their favorite retailer. That conversation just hasn't happened that much. I think
Yeah.
we've accepted that we really do like it when we go to our favorite online retailer and it says, "Hey, you're here for this, aren't you?" You're like, "How did you know that?" And yet you saved me 10 minutes searching for it. So awesome. So did I call you or did you call me? But I'm going to go a little counterintuitive here. I almost begin thinking, I'm being a futurist here. I almost begin thinking about privacy as a service of your local government, because there still is some trust in local government. And when everything is digital and all of our interactions are the lines between them are invisible. I can't tell the difference between me and the private sector, me and my government, me and my school system and my university, me and my job, me and the roads and my car. There's so much information going back and forth. I need a system that I can use to not only monitor the use of my information, but have kind of a hammer that I can use when somebody gets out of line. In Europe, we have the privacy regulation, GDPR, which has placed the government in a position to say, hey, citizens, if somebody does you wrong, you've got a tool now in this law. Now, that's a big tool, right? But we as local governments need to offer our citizens tools that will allow them to manage their own information and monitor things. And I think that that's a value add. I'll go one step further here, Lou. I think the revenue model of people paying taxes in order to live in a place is shaky. I don't know how long that's going to last. Governments are going to have to offer services that add value to citizens, and data privacy and even just other types of data management, because your vehicle, your home, your education, your job, they're all connected now. What is the role of your community in that? And could you use your community or a community resource to educate yourself about your privacy and take it to violators of these policies? Because if we leave it up to individuals and families to monitor how their data is being used, then people are not going to do it. So, what can we offer people that potentially could actually generate revenue as a service and instead of a
Right.
tax-based revenue system? So I realize I went way out there, but these are the kinds of
No, keep
things that I
going.
think about as a futurist and going a few years out. We need to stop thinking about just a compulsory tax system and think about value add on a digital level. People become digital citizens. And so that's where I'm going.
Yeah, well, just to pick up on that a little more, I think it also fulfills a role of government, which is to protect citizens, right? I mean, again, we're talking about commonly today policing. Well, that's really a discussion about how we want to be protected or not, whether the
Mhm.
organizations assigned to protect us are doing so adequately. With everything at the end of the day, to protect the citizens' rights to be citizens and to fulfill themselves is a function of government. So I don't think it's so far out there. I think the value add piece of it is really creative thinking around it. What is your feeling about blockchain in local government? What advice are you giving to your colleagues, and what's the buzz on that?
So I have a blockchain project, and it does involve our digital identity project. And my advice to colleagues is that you need to educate yourself about blockchain. If you're a skeptic, I would say think of it like cloud. Remember when we said I'll never put my servers in the cloud? So if you're a
Yeah.
local government that's still sitting on servers in your closet, um, you're really doing a disservice to your citizens, because there is a new infrastructure and you need to figure it out. And so blockchain is not ready yet, but it will be. And things will go on blockchain, and we will use blockchains, and our road systems and our transportation systems and the federal government. Everyone will be using blockchain in some way. It would be a lot cheaper and faster for you to familiarize yourself with this information infrastructure and think about the kinds of services that can go on there. I believe what we call PII, personal identifiable information, is a good use case for blockchain. But there are others as well in terms of money and payments and those things, and potentially, eventually, even voting. We're a long ways away from that. But when it comes, there will be two kinds of communities: those that are ready for it and are capitalizing on it, and those are playing catch up. And this is not something that you need to be big or wealthy to take advantage of learning this information. But in the future, it will cost more money to catch up than it will to explore, experiment, and learn today.
So again, get ahead of the curve. Again, Dublin has always done this. One of the areas where Dublin seems to also now be advancing is this area of autonomous vehicles. You're doing a lot of work there. Your region got a big grant from the DOT the year that Columbus was named Intelligent Community of the Year. Where do you see that relationship, transportation and the citizen, evolving to, given again the IT infrastructure that we're working on?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, we're very triple helix thinkers where this is concerned. And with autonomous vehicles, we want to attract people, companies, innovators, creators to test their technologies with us so that we can be ahead at the same time as having a national or even a global reputation as an innovative center, a hub. And we do that through the Beta District in working with a couple of other communities as well, Marysville and Union County, and certainly with our state through Drive Ohio. But to the other part of your question, Lou, driving, especially for Americans, not so much I think in other countries, but Americans' relationship with their car and their road is just extremely personal, and yeah. I think that we're dealing with a cultural shift here as well, which is not trivial. And if we have autonomous vehicles such that people don't need to own one as much anymore, and people will share more and have more of a shared model, that is a cultural shift that we as a local government need to get ready for as much as the technical shift, because people are going to have strong feelings about sharing the road with a new way of transporting goods, people, and services. And so that's something that, again, through social media or other community conversations, we need to be talking about now, so that 5 years from now, our citizens are ready for there to be a lane that they can't drive in, or a special new set of lights that only you can see inside your vehicle. It's no longer hanging off the side of the road. Just all sorts of true cultural shifts that, particularly in the United States of America, we are going to struggle with.
Yeah, that's for sure. But by the way, I just got my first car. I'm like an old man, but the typical New Yorker. I finally got a car, so the idea of even driving scares the heck out of me still. But
Right.
what's that going to look like, Doug? What is? I mean, when you envision Dublin in that environment with that one lane, with some of that technology in place, all the approvals that are going to be required from the departments of transportation, what is the first year of it going to look like for citizens?
So my opinion is that the first year is going to look pretty messy because we don't know. And the only way to get to this answer is to experiment. And we will have some experiments, but I can't call the first year. But I will say that going forward, we are seeing new designs for cities. So the autonomous vehicle and the way that we drive different means that we'll have different parks, different schools, different clusters of human activity that will require new designs for our cities themselves. And it's a lot less about the vehicle itself. And I don't know, I have a vision of it. I believe that there will at minimum be different kinds of rules and lights and driving and traffic patterns. There will be different kinds of lanes and parking and different ways that vehicles can pause or speed up. And I think it could be quite complex, but I truly hope that we have software running it so that we wouldn't even really recognize it. You'll be able to look at a street and I don't know what's going on there. That car is stopping and that bus is here and there's a drone overhead, but there is software managing all of it. And from my perspective as an individual, I should be able to just walk out into the street and I'll be safe and cars won't hit me and I'll get where I'm going and they'll get where they're going. And from today's eyes, it will be completely wacky. But for tomorrow's eyes, I think it will make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of like being a pilot and flying on instruments.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. But you'll have cities will have a real communication task on their hands when this stuff starts to go down, right? But
Yeah.
it's where it's headed. Doug, you alluded to something, and then, we should give people an update on what's happening in, as I say, one of the world's most followed intelligent communities, the place where we have our own institute. You alluded to the Beta District. What exactly is that?
So the Beta District is the rebranded name and designation of what we had been calling the 33 Smart Mobility Corridor. People outside of Ohio don't know that 33 is a highway that, kind of goes southeast to northwest and stretches across the state. But it's a very
This is from
interesting.
Central Ohio. From Central Ohio, you're
It
talking.
actually goes all the way down to Athens, so it
Ohio.
stretches across the state. But our little
Mhm.
corner of Highway 33 stretches from the city of Dublin through the city of Marysville, all the way up to East Liberty, Ohio, where there is the Transportation Research Center. So it's an interesting corridor with an opportunity to put some technology and fiber that would allow for connected and autonomous vehicle research. So that project and that council of governments that was put together to really attract companies to our region to do research has been rebranded the Beta District. And you can look up the website, betadistrict.com, to see some of the projects that we have going there. So one of the projects underneath the larger Beta District is Connected Marysville. And that's the Marysville's kind of smart city activities. Another project under the Beta District is Connected Dublin. So much of the work I do is within Dublin, but we can also work as a region with our state, with Drive Ohio. And that's what the Beta District is. It gives outsiders something to hang on to. It's like, I don't understand what you're talking about with your smart mobility corridor. So we're saying that corridor is part of this district. And we, as a nod to technology thinking, for a technologist, that your beta testing is when you go to the public and you say, okay, on a limited basis, we're going to test this technology, this innovation. So we're creating a district, and we're in competition with other regions around the world. All of you have a smart city or a district or a corridor. And so this is ours, and this is how we're setting it up. If you don't, you probably should have that. And let's talk about, what is your corridor? What is your district? But that is our regions, and we have high hopes for it.
Yeah. I just want to go way back to an earlier part of the conversation. And Mayor Eisenberger referred to this as well. Some of the comment you get on social media, as you say, maybe coming from out of town or from competitive communities that are trying to eat your lunch in terms of economic development. Are you able, on a one-way or two-way basis, to know if that's happening?
We can, now that we're using tools. I caution communities not just to read the negative information that they're seeing and assume that it is the will of the majority of people who actually vote and pay taxes and send their kids to your schools. You need to do a little digging, but Facebook in particular is extremely difficult to tell that. With our tools, we can measure, of the 150 negative posts on this particular topic for your community, 48 of them come from people who live where you are, according to our tool set. That's extremely helpful because it can keep you from running after a squirrel or a rabbit.
Right.
When the sentiment is just, you made national news and people think it's funny, but if you're a Midwestern city or a Northern Canadian city or a Taiwanese city, it's perfectly natural for our culture here, and the haters out there are not the ones that we should be building policy on. So you can do it, and I highly recommend you do.
Yeah. Just two more questions before I let you go. The Intelligent Ohio initiative, which started in Dublin, again, the vision of Dana McDaniel, the city manager, and he put you all to work on that. The idea was taken from your friends in Taiwan, where the national government wanted to have designated as many intelligent communities in that country as they can, with the assumption that if you get enough critical mass, it's kind of like the vaccine. You'll have this intelligent nation all of a sudden. and it'll lift the nation economically, socially, and all the things that we're proud of in the intelligent community movement. How's it going with the Intelligent Ohio initiative? Have you seen progress there that you're happy with, and has social media played any role at all yet?
So our evidence of how that is going comes a bit from having two Ohio communities in the top 7 last year, between Hudson, Ohio and Westerville, Ohio. There had not been a lot of presence from Ohio since Columbus and Dublin. And so that is a big deal for us. And we've been sharing information, and I'm actually pretty pleased with seeing how these communities are growing and adapting. Some of them have not competed and applied in the Intelligent Community Forum things. And so sometimes you're not going to see them as awards, but you'll see them in terms of the other lessons in the intelligent community movement. And the application is what's next for those kinds of things. But the reputation of an Intelligent Ohio has been enhanced. And we have seen responses, not taking credit for it at all, but we have seen our state government, really start to carry the ball a little bit more as well, particularly out of our governor's office. And the lieutenant governor has some significant innovation initiatives that we share and partner with. And so while we haven't done as much as Taiwan has, they're raising whole cities out of the ground. I was so thrilled to visit there and actually see how they think and what they're doing. We're years behind them, but it is the right path. And we're very pleased with the reactions and enthusiasm we're getting from Ohio communities, large and small. And, I think you'll see in the next few years, even more applications and more media coming from us. Social media was not necessarily a factor in doing that, but social media is one of the tools that we're using to assist our communities become intelligent communities.
Yeah, very good. And we sure would like to see more nominations from places like Marysville and others that you suggested. And again, by the way, they were thrilled to have you in Taiwan as well. I mean, you can see this collaboration now at work in places like Vietnam and elsewhere, where you guys have really influenced, the rest of the world to start lighting that fire. Hey, Doug, last quick question. You've got one of the better phrases. I always thought I was the good copywriter in the group here, but you talk about the intelligent community method and the program as allowing communities to be a better version of themselves. And I like that so much, because it's like, my mother always saying, wear a clean shirt, because people are going to think better of you. They're not going to see you as some kind of a little slob. But you mean it, of course, in a different way. What does that mean to you today in 2021 when you say to a community, you can be a better version of yourself?
It was an off the cuff kind of a inspirational kind of comment at the time, but I will tell you that when you look at cities, localities, communities, one characteristic that has been there for them is that they can't pick up and move. They can't pick up to more fertile farmland or just sort of have a different population or different thing. You get what you get. You have what you have. And one of the things that the Intelligent Community Forum methods have taught me is to take your assets and improve them no matter who you are. And I've also learned that while Dublin has a number of advantages, it has some disadvantages. These are all just characteristics of that particular community. And I say, whatever community you are, no matter where, and we learned this from the Corn Palace, and we learned this from Bindong and even Tallinn, Estonia. No matter what the assets and benefits you have, they will stitch together in such a way that you can be better without even changing anything, but just knowing, right, understanding, communicating what you already have makes you a better version of yourself. And that is what I think we want. We don't want communities to change into new entities. We want them to stay where they are and be greater. So that's my hope with that phrase.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. I mean, it's the old lesson. Everything you need is within yourself. You just have to find it or have a coach get you there, right? A Sherpa, whoever it is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Doug, I think that's a good way to close it. Um, I always, you know, it's always great to speak with you. I appreciate you coming by to do this. I know you're a busy guy these days, but we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Lou. And thanks to all the communities that are watching here. I miss you guys. I look forward to us being in person together again.